Hello friends, Kerrigan Skelly, refutingcalvinism.com, here with you today. Today I have a very interesting video for you. A video about a drug called Scopolamine. This is a very dangerous drug which is found in the country of Colombia in South America. And it's also called the devil's plant and the devil's breath. And what you're about to watch for about the next 9 minutes or so will intrigue you. It might even scare you a little bit. I began to look into this drug called scopolamine because of the different things I was seeing in our federal government, different mass murders, and that possibly these things were government setups and not actually people committing these crimes. But anyway, it has nothing to do with this video. This video is about scopolamine, and that this drug is a very dangerous drug, a very intriguing drug. And I'll tell you, the whole time I was watching this documentary that you're about to watch a clip of, one thing kept coming to mind. And so for the next 9 minutes, I'll come back after this 9 minutes is over with, but for about the next 9 minutes, you're going to watch some clips from a documentary on this drug, scopolamine, by Vice. And what you'll see in these clips, you'll get some information about the drug itself, what plant it comes from, etc. But then you'll begin to see interviews. You'll see an interview with a drug dealer. You'll see interviews of people who have been affected by this drug through being influenced by it themselves. And you'll hear how powerful this drug is and the effects it has on those people who've been influenced by it. You'll also hear from a toxicologist concerning scopolamine, and she'll tell you more about the science surrounding this drug. So I'll see you in about 9 minutes or so.
Burundanga. Burundanga is the source of scopolamine, which is basically like the worst roofie you can ever imagine, times a million. You're at the whim of suggestions like, hey, take me to your ATM. Hey, come with me to the hotel room, while you're completely conscious and articulate. So the deal with Burundanga is that it pretty much eliminates your free will. So you're awake and you're articulate, and to anyone else watching you, it seems like you're perfectly fine, but you've completely lost control of your own actions. So you're at the whim of suggestions, and that's how people take advantage of you. I've heard a bunch of different stories, really running the gamut. Some of them sound like kind of campfire horror stories you're told when you're growing up, stuff like waking up in a bathtub with an organ cut out and a sign saying you have 5 hours to get to the hospital. We've of course also heard that it's used as a date rape drug. We heard one particularly chilling story where a guy was taken back to his apartment, woke up the next morning in the empty apartment, completely confused as to what happened, went down and said to his doorman, you know, why is my apartment empty? What happened? And the doorman said, well, you brought it out with 2 of your friends last night, all your stuff. You loaded it into a van.
La escopola es una droga como ninguna, no tiene sin igual, ¿sí me entiendes? Tú coges con un soplido así, por ejemplo, tú estás aquí caminando y de repente, o sea, tú vas de espalda o vamos a una pinta caminando acá y yo me le paso por un lado y le hago así nomás con eso, nomás con ese destello. El man ya queda burundangueado. Tú esperas, cuando ya tú ves el efecto, es que el man empieza como a medio tal, entonces ya tú eres dueño total del man. Entonces tú lo coges, lo encanas y tú te lo llevas para donde tú quieras, parece un niño. Y tú te llevas, llévame a tu casa, saca tu chequera, dame tus cuentas de ahorros, tu número de tu tarjeta y tal. Y así. Se llama floripondio, su nombre científico es datura. De ahí se saca la scopolamina, pero también se le dice borrachero y se le dice la planta del diablo aquí en Colombia.
Está uno totalmente como un zombie sirviendo a una gente que te da unas órdenes. Es como que pierdes toda tu voluntad, lo que, no sé, que no puedes reaccionar, que no hay la capacidad de decir, oiga, hay algo muy malo en todo esto. En ese trayecto de ir a coger el bus, un hombre me paró y me dijo que si conocía una dirección, y pues él me dijo que si conocía esa dirección, me mostró el papel, yo por la ubicación estaba muy cerca. Cada vez que yo terminé llevándolo al señor hasta donde él quería, nos tomamos un jugo, que yo creo que ahí es donde me dieron la escopolamina, a través de la bebida.
So now we're here at the National University of Columbia. We're going to go talk to Dr. Miriam Gutierrez, who heads up the toxicology department here and apparently is an expert on scopolamine. I'm going to try and chat with her a bit about what actually happens when someone's exposed to the drug and try and figure out what this whole zombie thing really means.
Si vamos a verlo desde el punto de vista médico, esa sería la sustancia perfecta para los hechos delictivos, porque la víctima no va a recordar nada, por lo tanto no denuncia, porque cuando ellos tratan de recordar la persona que se la dio, no fija la memoria, y cuando ya se despertaba y se daba cuenta que había sido robado, él no se acordaba de que él mismo había colaborado. Entonces esa era la propiedad que se piensa se explota de sustancias como estas, que tienen la posibilidad de, entre comillas, hipnotizar al paciente.
Me llevaron hasta la casa, yo vivía ahí súper cerca, y saqué un poco de cosas, esculqué toda la casa, yo era feliz, esculcando, buscando, yo sabía que mi novio, con el que yo estaba viviendo, había tenido unos ahorros, los boté todo, volví todo una nada y busqué el sobre y lo encontré, desafortunadamente lo encontré. Estaba lleno de dólares, de euros, unos ahorros que eran de mi novio de hace mucho tiempo. Él era fotógrafo, entonces le di también unas cámaras. O sea, yo llegué y cogí todo lo que yo pude y encontré mi camino, y yo estaba feliz de buscar y quería buscar más, de hecho. Cuando me di cuenta, no, yo me puse a llorar y me fui inmediatamente a la estación de policía, que quedaba como unas 4 cuadras. Yo gritaba desesperada, me entró un momento de desesperación horrible. Fui muy afortunada en haber tenido una dosis muy pequeña, de que solamente me fueran hasta el apartamento y me sacaran el dinero que tenía. Pues para mí muy doloroso haber perdido plata, pero en últimas yo digo ahora que pues estuve muy de buenas. Si hubieran sido personas aún más malas todavía, tal vez hubiera terminado, podido ser violada en el apartamento o cualquier cosa.
Eso eran más o menos las 10, 11 de la noche. Empezamos a tomar, estábamos bailando, pues todo dentro de lo normal, muy sanamente. Nos terminamos esa de ron, pedimos nuevamente otra, pues ya estábamos como acalorados de los tragos. Llegó cierto momento que mi compañero dijo, no, Iván, yo me voy. Pero pues yo sí no me quise ir, yo estaba como muy sabrosa la cosa, muy chévere, y decidí quedarme otro rato. Pues yo creo que ese fue el error, porque al quedarme solo, ellas aprovecharon ese momento de pronto de hacerme algo. Uno de mis errores, aparte de quedarme solo, fue irme al baño y dejar la mesa sola. Obviamente cuando llegué, algo le habían echado al trago. Continuamos tomando. Ese lapso de tiempo de que se empiezan a olvidar las cosas, como ya sentirme mareado, sumo yo que ya empezaba a hacer efecto lo que le habían echado al trago. Recuerdo también que estábamos bailando y tomando, eso ya yo pienso que eran por ahí tipo 2 de la mañana. ¿Qué pasó después? No sé qué pasó, no puedo dar razón, no puedo decir hice, no hice, nada. Al día siguiente, tipo 8 de la mañana, aparecí en Castilla, en lugar de Castilla, en un parque, tirado, golpeado. Cómo me golpearon o qué pasaría. Robaron los papeles, sacaron la plata del cajero. Yo tenía unas tarjetas de crédito recién, lo mismo hicieron los avances. Primero perdí 6 millones de pesos más o menos. Yo estuve en los bancos preguntando y me mostraron videos donde yo retiraba la plata, pero no entraba con nadie. Pero sí había fuera de los cajeros 2 personas ahí esperándome. Asumo que eran las mismas señoritas con que yo estaba. son muy astutas, muy sagaces, entonces ellas se hacían en la parte posterior del, del cajero, donde ellas no se dejaban ver el rostro.
El problema con la escopolamina es que tú sales bien. O sea, tú sales, hey, ven, vámonos, sí, vámonos, caminas y vas, y ahora qué, y todo el mundo te ve así tranquilo, ¿no? No es, cha,
Claro.
no, el señor salió aquí, lo sacaron así. No, no, la escopolamina es, te atrapa la conciencia, te atrapa a ti, es una cosa tenaz. Tú, normal. Como una hipnosis química, sí, desde luego, es como, ¿sabe cómo le dicen en las calles, en el bajo fondo? Lo llaman el soplo del diablo, porque te roba el alma. Cuando yo volví a la casa, que me dijeron que había ido con una gente, que la portera me dijo, no, usted entró con una gente y ustedes sacaron los equipos, pero como lo vio como normal. Y ninguno estábamos ni borrachos ni nada, o sea, normal. Y la vuelta fue que nos llevaron a mi apartamento, yo entré a mi apartamento con las viejas, con el tipo, con Carlos, les entregué lo que se llevaron, o sea, lo que eran cámaras de video, todo, ¿me entendés? El billete, la cuenta, fui y desocupé lo que tenía, toda la historia. Yo amanecí en una parte, y que yo no me acordaba de nada, y que Carlos no aparecía, entonces nos pusimos a buscarlo y lo encontramos en medicina legal como en N. Y había muerto de sobredosis de escopolamina. Yo pienso que la muerte de él fue porque él aguantó mucho más, o sea, a él le tuvieron que estar permanentemente dando, hasta que se les quedó.
Okay, so that was a pretty interesting 9 minutes or so, huh? It's a very dangerous drug. You have people going through all kinds of things when they're under the influence of this drug. And of course, all these things were done against their will. But in light of all this information you have concerning scopolamine, I have some questions I want to ask you. And all these questions I want you to answer from a human perspective, what you think about it. If someone who's under the influence of this drug, not because they ingested it on purpose or wanted to be under the influence, but they're put under the influence of this drug, and they have sex with somebody else who's not under the influence of this drug. In fact, maybe it's the person who put them under the influence of scopolamine. Would you call that rape, or would you call that fornication? Okay, next question. If someone gives away all of their possessions while under the influence of this drug, and of course, once again, they're not under the influence of this drug according to their own will, but it's something that's put upon them, whether it's blown in their face or put in a drink or put in some food, they're ingesting it not on purpose. And they give away all their possessions to these people who put them under the influence of this drug. Would you consider that theft, or would you consider that a donation to someone, a gift to somebody? Okay, next question. If someone takes the possessions of another, like that one lady that you saw in the clip, who took her fiance's savings, his euros and his dollars, and gave them to the people who put her under the influence of scopolamine, that woman, is she guilty of theft, or is she guilty of being stolen from? Could her fiance take her to, she went to the police station as you saw in the clip, could her fiance take her to the police and have her arrested? And would a court of law find her guilty of theft, even though she's under the influence of scopolamine? If someone's under the influence of this drug, and they kill someone, or they commit suicide while under the influence of this drug, once again, put under the influence, not because they took it on purpose themselves, is such a person guilty of murder? So if you were a police officer and you were involved in this investigation, whether it's rape/fornication, or whether it is donation/stealing, whether it's stealing from someone else or not, and whether it's murder or not, how would you find these crimes? Would you charge the person who's under the influence against their own will with any crimes at all? Or would you try to find the person who put them under the influence of this drug first and accuse them of the crime? Who would be the bearer of the guilt in these crimes? So crimes were committed. Theft was done. And so someone must be guilty of crimes here. Who would be guilty of it? The person who's actually doing it, who's under the influence of the drug, or the people who put them under the influence of the drug? And if you were a judge, would you find such people who are under the influence of scopolamine, would you find them guilty of any crimes at all? Very intriguing questions. I think I know how all of you, or most of you, would respond to these. But in light of these questions, let's go to some more. Let's go to some quotes from some theologians, and then I'll come back and ask you some more questions. The Westminster Confession of Faith, Chapter 3, on God's Eternal Decree. Point 1. God from all eternity did by the most wise and holy counsel of his own will, freely and unchangeably ordain whatsoever comes to pass, yet so as thereby neither is God the author of sin, nor is violence offered to the will of the creatures, nor is the liberty or contingency of second causes taken away, but rather established. Westminster Confession of Faith, Chapter 6, on the fall of man, of sin, and the punishment thereof. Our first parents, being seduced by the subtlety and temptations of Satan, sinned in eating the forbidden fruit. This their sin God was pleased, according to his wise and holy counsel, to permit, having purpose to order it to his own glory. By this sin they fell from their original righteousness and communion with God, and so became dead in sin, and wholly defiled in all the parts and faculties of soul and body. They, being the root of all mankind, the guilt of this sin was imputed, and the same death in sin and corrupted nature conveyed to all their posterity descending from them by ordinary generation. From this original corruption, whereby we are utterly indisposed, disabled, and made opposite to all good, and wholly inclined to all evil, do proceed all actual transgressions. This corruption of nature during this life does remain in those that are regenerated, and although it be through Christ pardoned and mortified, yet both itself and all the motions thereof are truly and properly sin. Every sin, both original and actual, being a transgression of the righteous law of God, and contrary thereunto, does in its own nature bring guilt upon the sinner, whereby he is bound over to the wrath of God and the curse of the law, and so made subject to death, with all misery spiritual, temporal, and eternal. But those who, while they profess to be the disciples of Christ, still seek for free will in man, notwithstanding of his being lost and drowned in spiritual destruction, labor under manifold delusion, making a heterogeneous mixture of inspired doctrine and philosophical opinions, and so erring as to both. Creatures are so governed by the secret counsel of God that nothing happens but what he has knowingly and willingly decreed. We hold that God is the disposer and ruler of all things, that from the remotest eternity, according to his own wisdom, he decreed what he was to do, and now by his power executes what he decreed. Hence we maintain that by his providence, not heaven and earth, and inanimate creatures only, but also the counsels and wills of men, are so governed as to move exactly in the course which he has destined. Thieves and murderers and other evildoers are instruments of divine providence, being employed by the Lord himself to execute judgments which he has resolved to inflict. The devil and the whole train of the ungodly are in all directions held in by the hand of God as with a bridle, so they can neither conceive any mischief, nor plan what they have conceived, nor how much soever they may have planned, move a single finger to perpetrate, unless and so far as he permits, nay, unless and so far as he commands, that are not only bound by his fetters, but are even forced to do him service. How few are there who, when they hear free will attributed to man, do not immediately imagine that he is the master of his mind and will in such a sense that he can of himself incline himself either to good or evil. It may be said that such dangers are removed by carefully expounding the meaning to the people. But such is the proneness of the human mind to go astray. It will more quickly draw error from one little word than truth from a lengthened discourse. Of this, the very term in question, free will, furnishes too strong a proof. I think the abolition of it would be a great advantage to the church. I am unwilling to use it myself, and others, if they take my advice, will do well to abstain from it. Okay, so with all these quotes in mind, the question I have to ask you for my Calvinist watchers, or even for those who aren't Calvinists who are watching, what is the difference between Scopolamine and Calvinism? What is the difference between a criminal taking away the free will of a human being and decreeing or causing them to commit these crimes, and the God of Calvinism taking away the free will of man, or not giving them free will in the first place, except for Adam and Eve, and causing them to do all things whatsoever comes to pass? What is the difference between a criminal giving a innocent bystander scopolamine and then causing them to commit murder, and Adam and Eve taking away the free will of their posterity and imputing to them, transferring to them their own sin, making their posterity dead in sin, and that being the source and cause of all their actual sin, which, according to the Westminster Confession of Faith, actual and original sin is the cause of the wrath of God abiding on a person. And if you, in the first part, after you watch the clip from the Vice documentary, if you said to all those questions that the person who took scopolamine was not guilty of any crimes at all, because it was forced upon them, then how could you ever say that a sinner is guilty of any crimes at all if Calvinism is true? If the real reason why sinners sin is because God decreed it, God ordained it. If the real reason that sinners sin is because Adam and Eve fell, and that's the source of all the corruption they had within them. And how could you say that the criminals who gave the innocent bystanders scopolamine and then told them to empty their bank accounts, told them to steal their fiance's savings, told them to give them all their possessions, told them to do whatever it was. Maybe they raped them. Maybe they had sex with them and they did it willingly while they're under the influence of scopolamine. Maybe they told someone to kill somebody else while they're under the influence of scopolamine. How could you say the people who gave them scopolamine were actually guilty and criminals, but at the same time, if you believe in Calvinism, you won't say the God of Calvinism is guilty of any crimes? You won't say that, as the Westminster Confession of Faith said, he is not the author of sin. Now, there's very few people who call themselves Calvinists or who call themselves Christians at all who would admit that according to their view of predestination, according to their view of God's decree and God's sovereignty, that God is the author of sin. But I submit to you that if what you say about Calvinism and God and sovereignty and predestination and free will is true, then God couldn't be anything but guilty of crimes. God couldn't be anything but the author of sin. In fact, he would be the only sinner in all of the universe. And so, when I watched this Vice documentary, all that kept coming to mind is Calvinism. Because it takes away your free will. It steals your soul, as some of them said. And it makes you powerless. Even though you look like you still have free will, even though you don't look drunk, you don't look drugged, you don't have any free will. And you are drugged. And you are drunked. You are put under the power of the person who gave you the drugs. That's kind of the same way with Calvinism. I mean, people walk around, they look like they have free will. They look like they're responsible for their choices and accountable for their choices and guilty for their sin. And even Calvinism will say those things. But in all reality, they're not. They're being controlled by someone or something else that's causing, decreeing, or ordaining them to do such things. They're basically like zombies, like that girl said in the Vice documentary. And so I submit to you that there really is not much difference between the devil's breath or the devil's plant, scopolamine, and the doctrines of Calvinism when it comes to these things. There's no difference at all. And if you're a Calvinist, or you think Calvinism is okay, and you've submitted to this idea that just because I believe or Calvinists believe that God decrees all things whatsoever comes to pass, doesn't mean that God's the author of sin, then you're being inconsistent. You shouldn't be able to say about the criminal who gave the innocent bystander scopolamine that they're guilty of any crimes either. Your definition of guilt, your definition of not being the author of sin or being the author of sin, wouldn't fly in the situation of scopolamine. It wouldn't fly in any other situation in life, except for with your theology. And so hopefully this will kind of help you wake up and philosophically think about these things a little bit better, and then submit to the truth on these issues. Hope this video was a blessing to you. Hopefully you'll really consider these things. God bless.